The moment I transmigrated into this novel, my fiancé was splashed across the tabloids, caught entering a hotel with someone else, actions decidedly beyond platonic. The very next morning, he had the audacity to explain it to my face, his eyes darting nervously. "Eleanor, darling, Isabelle and I, it's nothing. Just media sensationalism, you know how they are." Placing the marriage certificate squarely on the table between us, I offered a gentle reminder, "Remember to call me mother from now on, Charles." According to the plot of this ridiculous book, our wedding was a month away. Charles Thornton, my fiancé, and I were a textbook case of a family-mandated union. I was supposed to be desperately in love with him. He, of course, was hopelessly enamored with Isabelle Sterling. Isabelle, the very woman plastered all over the front pages, caught in compromising positions with my fiancé. The news reports were positively salacious, detailing their 3-day, 3-night rendezvous, inseparable and intertwined, painting a picture so vivid it made my teeth ache. How dare Charles Thornton? Outrageous. If it weren't for Alexander Thornton's influence, he'd be nothing. My father paced the length of the drawing room, his voice booming with indignation. My mother, seated on the sofa, dabbed at her tear-filled eyes with a lace handkerchief, a picture of heartbroken gentility. Meanwhile, I nestled into a wingback chair, languidly scrolling through the online news articles, zooming in on the photographs. I had to admit, whoever had paid for this exposé had gotten their money's worth. Charles and Isabelle did make a rather handsome couple, in a vapid, perfectly sculpted sort of way. "Eleanor, don't you worry, your father will settle this score." My father, Clarence, paused his pacing, thumping his chest with a fist. My mother, a classic Southern belle with porcelain skin and gentle curves, even managed to cry gracefully, her tears like delicate raindrops. "Clarence, we must call off the engagement. Their family is utterly disrespectful." Clarence immediately snatched up his phone and stormed out to make a call, presumably to unleash his fury on the Thorntons. I finally put down my phone and inquired of my mother, "Where is our marriage license kept?" She blinked, momentarily bewildered, looking rather adorable in her distress. I couldn't help but admire her classic beauty. "In the study, dear. Your father keeps it locked in the safe." The old romantic, just as the books described, fiercely devoted to his wife and paranoid about any potential for separation. After retrieving the marriage license, I gave an address to our driver, instructing him to take me there immediately. The driver glanced at the address, the Thornton residence. Upon arrival, Walter, our loyal driver, couldn't quite suppress his concern. "Miss Eleanor, if you would permit me to wait outside? It's quite late, and venturing out alone isn't entirely safe." I offered a reassuring smile. "Thank you, Walter, but please come back for me tomorrow morning." The Thornton estate was nestled halfway up a hillside, rumor had it they owned the entire peak. The mansion itself was sprawling, the distance from the gates to the front door a considerable walk. No unannounced visits were generally permitted, but that was hardly a deterrent. I reached out and pressed the doorbell. 1 minute, 2. I must have rung for a solid 5 minutes before movement finally stirred behind the imposing doors. "Yes? Who is it?" A middle-aged woman's voice, undoubtedly one of their household staff. "It's Eleanor Cheen. I'm here to see Alexander Thornton." Alexander Thornton was the patriarch of the Thornton family, Charles's father, and in a month's time, he was supposed to be my father-in-law. A man of formidable power and intellect, Alexander had inherited the Thornton empire after his father's early demise and, within a decade, had expanded their business ventures exponentially, eclipsing even my own family's considerable wealth. A man of exceptional ability, handsome, and undeniably wealthy. For reasons unknown to me, he had adopted Charles, a boy 8 years his junior. I was ushered into the grand hall and seated on a plush sofa, patiently waiting. Approximately 10 minutes later, a faint sound of footsteps echoed from the grand staircase. The man descending was tall and lean, his spine ramrod straight, each movement exuding an effortless elegance and inherent authority. A lifetime spent at the pinnacle of power had etched a cool detachment into his features, a glacial aloofness that commanded respect and discouraged familiarity. To the casual observer, he might appear to be a mere ice sculpture of a man. But those who had crossed paths with him in the cutthroat world of business knew the chilling truth. Alexander Thornton was a veritable ice-blooded demon, ruthless in his dealings, and utterly unforgiving. Alexander settled into the armchair opposite me, his expression decidedly grim. To what do I owe this late-night visit, Miss Jean? I placed the damning newspaper front page on the coffee table, sliding it across towards him. Your son's exemplary behavior. It seems both our families are about to become the laughingstock of society. Alexander's gaze flickered down, barely glancing at the paper. He didn't need to read the text. I had thoughtfully enlarged the photograph to an almost comical degree, printed in glorious, unflattering color. This matter will be addressed. The Jean family will receive a satisfactory explanation. Alexander's tone was dismissive, a hint of annoyance even. Coloring his words. If I wasn't mistaken, he was irritated that I had dared to disturb his peace over what he clearly considered a trivial matter. I gave a small, brittle laugh. A real dog of a man. And what form will this explanation take? Will Charles be forced to dispose of the woman, issue a public apology, and claim it was all a misunderstanding? Alexander's gaze sharpened, focusing on me with an unnerving intensity. His eyes were glacial, utterly devoid of warmth. Most people would have crumbled under such scrutiny. Are you dissatisfied with that proposed resolution, Miss Jean? I lowered my gaze, my slender, manicured fingers tracing the intricate embroidery on my limited edition handbag. Your son's indiscretion, his utter lack of self-control, his blatant disregard for the reputation of both our families. It makes one question whether he possesses the necessary judgment to be a suitable partner in such a significant union. Why should I accept a man with such a glaring deficit in perspective? Alexander remained silent for a beat, seemingly considering my audacious statement. Perhaps he was even persuaded? And what resolution do you propose, Miss Jean? I offered a demure smile, almost coy. The Jean family is, of course, deeply disappointed. We cannot possibly proceed with the marriage to him. However, I paused, letting the implication hang in the air. We wouldn't want this unfortunate incident to disrupt the otherwise amicable and profitable relationship between our families. The initial announcement, I continued, my voice carefully modulated, spoke of a Jean-Thornton alliance, but it never explicitly specified which Jean and which Thornton. I let my eyes drift towards Alexander, letting him grasp the unspoken proposition. Understanding dawned in his icy blue eyes. You're suggesting you wish to marry me? A flicker of something akin to mockery touched his lips, quickly suppressed. A man of considerable self-control, he kept his emotions leashed. I allowed a small, knowing smile to grace my lips. Well-bred men always managed to maintain a veneer of composure, even when internally combusting. I lifted my chin, the gesture delicate yet defiant. It's not about your assets, Mr. Thornton, if that's your concern. It's about salvaging the situation, preserving the honor of both families. We present a united front, a strategic marriage. 2 years, perhaps? Then we divorce. Business ties remain intact, reputations remain unscathed. After all, it was your son's blunder that created this mess. It seems only logical that the father should step in to rectify the situation. Something in my audacious proposal, perhaps the sheer pragmatism of it, or perhaps the thinly veiled threat to his family's reputation, resonated with Alexander. He agreed. Very well. I will have a car sent for you in the morning. He clearly intended to dismiss me then and there. I widened my eyes innocently. Oh, no need. We're practically betrothed, soon to be wed. Wouldn't it be far more impactful if we arrived together tomorrow? A united front, as it were? Alexander's gaze narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable in his depths. Marriage requires certain documentation, Miss Jean. I patted my handbag, beaming with smug confidence. Rest assured, Mr. Thornton. I came prepared. For a fleeting moment, Alexander Thornton's expression was a fascinating study in complex emotions, disbelief, grudging respect, and perhaps a sliver of reluctant amusement. But I had achieved my objective. That night, I was shown to a guest room. The following morning, I made it a point to knock insistently on Alexander's bedroom door. Ignoring the Arctic chill radiating from him, I urged, hurry, darling. The marriage registry is always crowded. We need to get there early, to secure our place in line. Alexander's lips quirked into a sardonic smile. Miss Jean, perhaps you should familiarize yourself with current affairs. The number of people rushing to get married isn't quite as overwhelming as you seem to believe. 2 hours of queuing later, we finally made it inside. Ignoring the thunderous scowl etched on my soon-to-be husband's face, I linked my arm through his, radiating saccharine sweetness. The tableau we presented was rather comical, the triumphant trophy wife finally securing her reluctant, yet financially obligated, boy toy. Cheer up, darling. It's the 20th of May, after all, a date for love. You're always so consumed with work, it's understandable you might be a bit out of touch with modern romantic customs. Soon to be his wife, I felt it was my duty to offer some gentle, wifely comfort. How thoughtful, he ground out, each word extracted through gritted teeth. Emotions may not vanish, but they can certainly be redirected. His mood was abysmal, mine, however, was positively buoyant. Don't mention it, darling. Upon returning from the registry, I was promptly, albeit politely, evicted. Of course, the man was nothing if not impeccably mannered, even in his dismissal. We need to prepare for the wedding ceremony. It's hardly convenient for you to reside here in the interim. I accepted my marching orders with grace, clutching my newly acquired prize, and returned home with an almost indecent haste. My father, Clarence, was surprisingly still at home at this hour, a rare occurrence. The moment he saw me, he launched himself forward, tears welling in his eyes. Child. You vanished all night. Where on earth were you? Phone dead, no location tracking, you're going to give me a heart attack. I bristled. You put a GPS tracker on me again? Clarence feigned injured innocence, rapidly regaining his bluster. We are a family of considerable standing, with numerous rivals. Heaven forbid you get kidnapped and I have to pay ransom. When I call the police, at least I can provide them with a location. Huh. As if he'd ever part with a single penny of ransom money. The miserly old tycoon. I snorted and tossed him the marriage license. Looking for this, were you? Here. Clarence snatched the license, scurrying to lock it back in the safe, surreptitiously changing the combination yet again. Only then did he seem to relax, heading off to his company. As for my marital affairs, my family, in essence, subscribed to a free-range parenting philosophy. On my 18th birthday, my father had delivered a solemn speech, daughter. You are now an adult. Financial independence is paramount. And in life's tribulations, learn to solve your own problems. Don't come running back to your mother at every turn. I suspected that last part was the crux of his entire pronouncement. Ever since he'd gifted me a sliver of company shares, he hadn't graced me with a single penny of direct allowance. My annual income was solely dependent on those dividends. And indeed, I had grown accustomed to handling my own affairs, only seeking my father's intervention when absolutely at wit's end. His dramatic outrage yesterday? Mostly for my mother's benefit, I surmised. Shaking off these reflections, I sank onto the sofa. Agnes, our housekeeper, had brewed a pot of green tea. I poured a cup, settling in to await visitors. It wasn't long before the novel's male protagonist, Charles Thornton himself, arrived, in tow with a woman, none other than Isabelle Sterling, the heroine of this tangled mess. Charles wore a strained smile, a veneer of forced contrition, struggling to mask an underlying smugness. His reasonably handsome features were contorted in a rather unflattering manner. Isabelle, for her part, was the picture of delicate beauty, her demeanor all gentle serenity and fragile charm. Petite and ethereal, she was the type to evoke protective instincts. However, having just witnessed my mother's timeless elegance, Isabelle now struck me as rather ordinary. My gaze drifted to Isabelle's rather low-cut neckline, where a faint, telltale blush of red was just visible. Perhaps deliberately showcased. I sipped my tea. What brings you here, unannounced? While we were technically betrothed, or rather, had been, Charles and I were hardly close. His visits were usually prearranged. Charles's expression flickered with what might have been shame, swiftly suppressed. You must have seen yesterday's news. Isabelle was concerned you might have misunderstood. So, I brought her to clarify things. Misunderstood? I echoed, a slow smile spreading across my face. Misunderstood what, exactly? Charles shifted uncomfortably. For a Thornton, being forced to offer explanations, to lower himself to this level, must have been agonizing. Isabelle, sensing his discomfort, tugged gently at his sleeve, her large, doe eyes pleading. He finally choked out, yesterday. I was merely picking Isabelle up. The media, they sensationalized it. Made it seem far more intimate than it was. I feigned a sudden understanding. Ah, you mean the reports of you both holing up in a hotel for 3 days and nights were exaggerated? It was actually just a single night at the hotel? Charles visibly relaxed, relief flooding his features. Precisely. Isabel's eyes flashed with fleeting annoyance, quickly masked. Yes, Miss Jean, please don't misunderstand. I just returned from overseas and don't know many people here. Charles and I were friends from school, so naturally, I turned to him. Her voice was soft, almost breathy, with a hint of deliberate raspiness. I arched an eyebrow, setting down my teacup. Agnes, darling, could you prepare a pot of fruit tea? This green tea is far too strong, quite upsetting to the stomach. Charles's brow furrowed with impatience, but he continued, Eleanor, Isabelle and I, there's nothing untoward between us. It's all media fabrication. I fixed him with a steady gaze, observing the nervous flicker in his eyes. Then, I offered a languid smile, reaching into my designer handbag and extracting a familiar red document. I opened the marriage certificate, sliding it across the table towards him with deliberate slowness. Silly boy, I said, my voice honeyed with mock maternal affection. Whatever you and others do is entirely your own affair. You're a grown man now, Charles. You must learn to manage your own indiscretions. And in the future, when you address me, remember to use the proper form of address. You will call me Mother. Agnes arrived with a steaming pot of fragrant fruit tea. I poured a cup, savoring the aroma, and watched with undisguised delight as Charles Thornton's face underwent a spectacular color transformation. Charles snatched up the marriage certificate, his face darkening to a shade of thunderous purple. Eleanor Jean, even if you're trying to provoke me, you could have chosen a slightly more sophisticated method. But then again, he sneered, considering your intellectual limitations, perhaps this is the best you could manage. Charles, bless his heart, did have a point about my supposed intellectual shortcomings. After all, the original Eleanor Jean, the pre-transmigration version, had made a series of truly questionable decisions. In this melodramatic CEO Falls for Cinderella novel, I, Eleanor Jean, was cast as the brainless, spiteful villainess, dedicated to making the heroine, Isabelle, miserable. Looking back at the original plot, the things I had done were an utter disgrace to my social standing. Who was I, Eleanor Jean, truly? A woman with millions in assets, owning multiple sprawling estates. Charles Thornton, while designated as the male lead, was, in reality, a mere fledgling. He was still at the stage of begging his father for funds, his personal wealth paling in comparison to mine. Hence, my father's earlier remark, were it not for Alexander Thornton's influence and business acumen, our family would have never even considered this alliance. Now, however, with my consciousness firmly in control and my brain functioning at optimal capacity, why should I waste my time on a philandering, distinctly inferior man? Why not simply cut out the middleman and go straight to the father? Far more strategic, and undeniably more interesting. I let Charles rant and rave for a good 5 minutes, before finally, with a languid wave of my hand, I placed a call to Alexander Thornton. First attempt, the call went unanswered. Charles's lips curled into a smug smirk. Excellent. I filed that particular slide away, adding it to the growing ledger of Alexander Thornton's accumulating debts to me. I redialed, persistent, and simultaneously sent a text message, if you don't answer, I'm heading straight to the press. This time, the phone was answered almost instantly. A small, internal victory. Checkmate, indeed. No preamble, no greeting. I purred into the phone, my voice dripping with saccharine sweetness, darling? Our son is here, with his little friend. They're being dreadfully unkind to me. You simply must come to my rescue. A pregnant silence descended on the other end of the line. 2 seconds passed before Alexander's voice, laced with a mixture of exasperation and something else I couldn't quite decipher, finally broke through. His friend? Which one? His voice, amplified by the speakerphone, conveyed Alexander's characteristic glacial indifference with chilling efficiency. Charles's face, already pale, drained of color further, acquiring a distinctly greenish tinge. Isabelle, however, visibly perked up, a flicker of triumphant excitement in her eyes. Ah, she imagined her name was about to be formally acknowledged, her position legitimized. How utterly predictable. I offered Charles a saccharine smile. The one he's been parading all over the tabloids, darling. Alexander's voice deepened, acquiring an even more ominous undertone. This matter is no longer your concern, Eleanor. I will handle it. I offered a delicate little sniff. Nonsense, darling. He's been dreadfully rude to my face. Of course, it's my concern. Alexander sighed, a sound of utter, weary resignation. 5 o'clock. My driver will collect you. Family dinner this evening. Alexander Thornton's family dinner was, in reality, a grand affair, a formal banquet involving the entire extended Thornton clan. A thinly veiled attempt to introduce me to the family hierarchy, to formally present me as, well, something. And of course, Charles would be expected to attend. I hung up, a soft chuckle escaping my lips. You hear that, Charles? Your father is going to handle things. I turned back to Charles, a predatory gleam in my eyes. Now, you will address me respectfully, call me mother with genuine sincerity, and perhaps, just perhaps, I might put in a good word for you tonight. Eleanor Cheen, in your dreams. Charles roared, his voice echoing through the drawing room. Charles and his little friend eventually stormed out, leaving me to contemplate the evening's impending drama. I pouted, dialing Alexander's number once more. The call was answered almost instantly. Before he could even utter a greeting, I launched in, your son, in front of his companion, yelled at me. Yelled. And it was very loud. A barely perceptible sigh, almost inaudible, reached my ears through the phone. I will address it this evening. Into the phone, I cooed, sweetness personified, oh, darling, you're simply the best. Call concluded, I fired off a quick voice message to Charles. Little brat, you're so dead tonight. But, I added with magnanimous generosity, your mother, being the benevolent soul she is willing to overlook this indiscretion. Transfer a mere 20 million to my account, and we can consider this matter closed. The message vanished into the digital ether, met with utter silence. Not even a read receipt. After patiently waiting for 2 minutes, I sent a follow-up question mark. The response? A single, glaring red exclamation point. The little ingrate had blocked me. I shook my head, tutaying softly. Young people these days, so utterly lacking in patience and strategic foresight. Well, he hardly deserved any more of my precious time. I rose, heading upstairs, to the dressing room. Hours were spent sifting through my extensive wardrobe, finally narrowing it down to a handful of favorite ensembles, still agonizing over the final choice. Photos were taken, messages sent to Alexander, each outfit meticulously documented. Again, silence. Just as I was contemplating a full-scale phone barrage, a laconic reply finally materialized. Family dinner tonight. Neither overly formal nor excessively casual. I parsed and reparsed the message, extracting every possible nuance. He was, undeniably, a man of few words, a master of concise ambiguity. Utterly unhelpful. It was already 4:30. Neither overly formal nor excessively casual. Casual elegance, then? I opted for a soft, understated dress in a muted pastel shade, nothing too attention-grabbing. My hair, styled in loose, flowing waves, was subtly enhanced with a delicate crystal butterfly clip. A light, barely there makeup application, completed the look. Perfectly understated, effortlessly chic. I descended to the front hall, ready and waiting. The evening air was crisp, a gentle breeze ruffling stray strands of hair. I tucked them behind my ear, just as a sleek, black Maybach materialized, gliding silently to a stop before me. The chauffeur opened the door, revealing Alexander already seated inside, engrossed in a document, his voice low and even as he greeted me. The car interior was enveloped in a hushed silence. After a prolonged stretch of quiet contemplation, as if suddenly remembering my presence, Alexander spoke, his voice low, almost an afterthought. You were punctual this evening, Miss Cheen. Well, naturally. We had an engagement, Mr. Thornton. Punctuality is, after all, a virtue. My tone was light, almost playful. Alexander's gaze flickered towards me, and I could almost see the ghost of Charles's tabloid escapades flash across his mind. His carefully cultivated aura of composure seemed to solidify, the temperature in the car dropping a degree or two. I rested my chin on my hand, gazing out the window at the passing scenery, a serene smile playing on my lips. Oh yes, I thought, anticipation simmering beneath the surface. Tonight's family dinner is going to be fascinating. Family dinner was slated for 7 o'clock. We arrived at 5:30. Alexander introduced me with a minimum of fanfare, a brief, almost perfunctory announcement. The assembled Thornton clan, a formidable gathering of impeccably dressed individuals, turned their collective gaze upon me. Their scrutiny, while subtle, was palpable. However, their surface politeness was flawless, the social niceties meticulously observed. I was showered with a veritable avalanche of lavish welcome gifts, checks discreetly slipped into my handbag, promises of luxury cars, designer handbags, and bespoke jewelry to be delivered to my residence the following day. From the moment I crossed the threshold, my smile remained firmly, and genuinely, in place. After the initial flurry of introductions and polite exchanges, Alexander was whisked away by a cohort of older relatives, disappearing into the study for urgent discussions on business matters. The remaining female contingent, a formidable assembly of matriarchs and socialites, suggested a friendly game of mahjong. I, however, politely excused myself, citing a sudden need for fresh air. The Thornton estate was vast and sprawling. I settled onto a secluded garden swing, idly replying to messages from my parents, when the sound of approaching footsteps broke the tranquil quiet. Well, imagine my surprise to see Mr. Thornton actually brought you here. When Charles told me, I thought he was joking, trying to cheer me up. The saccharine, deliberately affected voice grated on my nerves. I didn't bother turning around. Isabel Sterling, isn't it? Tonight is a Thornton family dinner. The Sterling family doesn't quite fit the invitation, does it? Family dinners are for family, of course. And Charles has proposed to me, you see. So, naturally, I'm practically family now. She tossed her hair, the affected sweetness in her voice amplified. Isabel was, undeniably, dressed to impress. A scarlet, form-fitting fishtail gown clung to her figure, enhancing her pale skin. Her hair was elaborately styled. Her makeup flawlessly applied, and a diamond necklace, the size of a pigeon egg, adorned her neck. Her earrings and rings were equally encrusted with diamonds. Her entire ensemble screamed red carpet premiere, not intimate family gathering. Proposed, has he? My smile tightened, losing some of its earlier warmth. It wasn't jealousy, not in the slightest. It was sheer disbelief at Charles's utter, breathtaking stupidity. To propose to Isabel, to bring her to a Thornton family dinner, while his engagement to me was still technically in place, while the Cheen-Thornton alliance and business negotiations were still very much active. The man was a monumental idiot. Indeed. If you possess even a modicum of sense, you'll gracefully remove yourself from the Thornton picture. Save yourself the embarrassment of being squeezed between Charles and me at dinner. I snorted. Isabel, don't flatter yourself. You're not nearly as significant as you seem to believe. The fall from such heights is always the most painful. Isabel's presence was rapidly depleting my already dwindling desire to remain. Just as I was about to excuse myself and retreat indoors, Isabel darted forward, planting herself squarely in my path. And then, with a sudden, theatrical lunge, she threw herself directly at me. Completely unprepared for this bizarre assault, Isabel's full weight slammed into me. I lost my balance, the swing tipping violently, sending me sprawling onto the manicured lawn. Ah! Oh, my ankle! Isabel wailed, her voice rising in pitch. Isabel, now dramatically sprawled beside me, her face contorted in a picture of faux anguish, continued her performance. Miss Jean. Even if you dislike me, you could have simply told me. If you had said so, I would have gladly disappeared and never bothered you again. But why resort to physically tripping me? You must know I'm wearing stilettos today. If I fall, there's a high chance of twisting my ankle. Were you deliberately trying to humiliate me at the family dinner? I understand you're upset about Charles, but Charles and I are genuinely in love. We are engaged now, in fact. Please, just let Charles go. Don't come between us anymore. I stared at her, utterly bewildered. This woman was clearly deranged. Are you out of your mind? It was you who. Eleanor, that's enough. Charles stormed out of the French doors, his face a mask of righteous fury. Charles, my ankle. It's terribly painful. Isabelle whimpered, tears welling in her eyes, her lower lip trembling. She clutched at her ankle, a picture of fragile vulnerability. Charles's voice softened instantly, morphing into a soothing murmur. Careful, darling, don't put any weight on it. Lean on me. Let me help you up. He turned his venomous gaze on me, his expression radiating utter disgust. Eleanor, how dare you? You're crying? You're the one who should be apologizing to Isabelle. Apologize? For what? For being attacked? I sputtered, struggling to sit up, Isabelle's weight still partially crushing me. My lower back was throbbing with a dull, agonizing ache. Love can't be forced, Eleanor. I don't love you. It's not something you can demand. But you can't take your resentment out on an innocent girl. Isabelle is the most gentle, the most kind-hearted woman I've ever met. Charles, Isabelle breathed, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. Charles gazed at Isabelle, his eyes overflowing with tender adoration. Me. At this juncture, in any sane narrative, I should have leaped to my feet, delivered a resounding slap to both their faces, and then hurled them, hand in hand, into the nearest fountain. Perhaps follow that up with a scathing, witty monologue, capturing their mortification on camera, and then leak the footage online for maximum public humiliation. Tomorrow's headlines, courtesy of Eleanor Cheen. But alas, rising was proving to be an insurmountable task. Isabelle's dead weight, combined with the impact of the fall, had sent a searing pain shooting through my lower back, directly into my tailbone. A dull, agonizing ache was rapidly escalating. Tears, genuine, involuntary tears of pain, were welling in my eyes. Charles, still cradling Isabelle, cast me a final, contemptuous glare. Eleanor, you have the audacity to cry? The least you can do is apologize to Isabelle. Apologize to, you moron, the pain was making it hard to think, let alone articulate properly. No, wait. Correction. I was his mother now. Damn it. Why hadn't I considered the full implications of that little detail during the marriage registry? It was seriously hindering my ability to unleash a truly epic, villainous tirade. Walter, a deep, resonant voice, cut through the escalating melodrama. Please call Dr. Jing, immediately. Strong arms encircled me, lifting me effortlessly. And call the police, while you're at it. I seem to have underestimated the audacity of modern youth. To openly assault someone on private property, and then have the gall to play the victim. Alexander's voice dripped with icy disdain as he cast a withering glance at the pathetic duo. See to it that they are detained. They are not to leave these grounds until the authorities arrive. Charles finally snapped out of his lovesick stupor. Father. But it was Eleanor, she pushed Isabelle. Isabelle lost her footing and fell on her. It was entirely her own fault. Alexander ignored his son's sputtering protests, striding purposefully towards the mansion, me cradled securely in his arms. Eleanor. What happened? Are you hurt? Alexander's mother, my new grandmother-in-law, rushed forward, her face etched with concern. Alexander deftly sidestepped her. Suspect a spinal injury, mother. I'm taking her upstairs. I've already called for a doctor. Please proceed with dinner. Dinner? How can we possibly eat with Eleanor injured? Where is the doctor? The elderly matriarch was in a state of flustered agitation, finally resorting to swatting Alexander's back with a surprisingly forceful hand. Honestly, Alexander. You manage vast corporations with such competence, and yet, your personal affairs are in such disarray. You can't even manage to protect your own wife. What good are you? Alexander sighed, a sound of weary resignation. My apologies, mother. It is entirely my fault. Please, don't fret. I just need to get Eleanor to bed. Escaping the clutches of his concerned relatives, Alexander carried me upstairs to a lavishly appointed bedroom. He gently placed me face down on the plush mattress. Eleanor Cheen, he said, his voice laced with dry amusement. You truly are something else. Managed to injure yourself merely by swinging on a garden swing. I bristled, the pain momentarily forgotten in the face of his condescension. It wasn't the swing. It was Isabelle. She deliberately shoved me. Alexander arched a skeptical eyebrow. Are you and Miss Sterling particularly close? Are you blind? The retort hovered on my tongue, but I managed to swallow it down. No. No? Alexander repeated, a hint of disbelief in his voice. Then why were you in such close proximity? Why give her the opportunity to shove you? This entire situation is entirely of your own making, wouldn't you say? His words, while infuriatingly logical, only served to exacerbate my already considerable pain. I forced a strained smile, gritting my teeth. She is, after all, your son's fiancé. Unseemly for me to create a public spectacle, wouldn't you agree? Not just for you, but for the Thornton family reputation. A single finger tapped lightly against my forehead, a surprisingly gentle gesture. His voice, calm and measured, resonated just above my ear. Spare me the veiled insinuations. If you disapprove of Miss Sterling, she will not be permitted within these walls. Tomorrow, you will acquire 2 personal bodyguards. Or, if you prefer, I will arrange it. Should you ever find yourself in her vicinity again, and desire her removal, simply instruct your guards to escort her off the premises. And if I wish to converse with her? I couldn't resist a small, mischievous tease. Alexander's voice remained utterly serious, devoid of humor. Then your bodyguards will escort her to a distance of 2 meters. Any communication will be relayed through your security detail. Pfft. The image that conjured in my mind was so utterly absurd, so ridiculously over the top, that I finally succumbed, burying my face in the silken sheets, muffled laughter bubbling up, despite the throbbing pain in my lower back. But even a suppressed chuckle sent a sharp, agonizing jolt through my spine. Oh, this was going to be a long night. Dr. Zheng arrived around the same time as the police. The commotion downstairs was growing more intense, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of morbid curiosity. Dr. Zheng completed his examination. A hairline fracture, indeed. Bed rest for a period is necessary. I'll prescribe some medication. You'll be able to walk in about a week, but still, minimize movement as much as possible. Alexander listened attentively to the doctor's instructions. After seeing Dr. Zheng out, I tugged at Alexander's sleeve, unable to contain my curiosity. It's awfully loud downstairs. Is Isabelle going to be arrested? Alexander gently removed my hand from his sleeve, settling onto the edge of the bed. That depends entirely on whether you wish to press charges. I considered it for a moment, then adopted a deliberately soft and delicate tone. Perhaps not. Let them come up here and apologize. That's sufficient. Before you arrived, Charles was quite vocal. He shouted at me rather loudly. Alexander's eyes narrowed, studying me for a beat, before a subtle, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a smile I couldn't see from my prone position. Very well, he agreed. As you wish. About 15 minutes later, Charles and Isabelle were ushered into the room. Isabelle's eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. She clung to the hem of Charles's jacket, her gaze directed at me, a picture of timid vulnerability. Upon seeing me lying on the bed, Isabelle buried her face in Charles's shoulder, bursting into a fresh torrent of tears. Miss Jean. Eleanor, I didn't mean to. I must have been flustered. I misspoke. I didn't intentionally push you. I'm simply not accustomed to such high heels, I lost my balance. It wasn't deliberate, I swear. Charles, ever the chivalrous protector, stepped in front of her, shielding her from my view. Eleanor, this is all my fault. I gifted Isabelle those shoes. She's still adjusting to them. It was a simple misunderstanding. We are, after all, practically family now, aren't we? Surely, we don't need to escalate this matter. It wouldn't reflect well on either family if this became public. Family, now that things had gone south, he remembered we were family. My back was still screaming in protest, so I decided to let the family comment slide, for the moment. Your father sent for you both to apologize, not to further antagonize me. Charles's expression shifted, becoming strained and unnatural. Eleanor, I admit, my actions regarding the broken engagement were regrettable. But that's in the past. You're married to my father now. Surely, there's no need to keep dredging up old grievances? I shifted slightly, wincing at the stab of pain in my back, and subtly edged away from the pair. If that's all you have to say, perhaps you should both leave. So, you forgive us? Charles asked, a glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes. Forgive you, I paused, drawing out the words, forgive you, my foot. Having a son like this is truly bad luck. If you're not here to offer a genuine apology, then kindly remove yourselves. Your presence is hardly conducive to a patient's recovery. Charles, unaccustomed to such blunt dismissal, was about to retort, but Isabelle tugged at his sleeve, restraining him. Charles, against his better judgment, bit back his retort. Isabelle, however, had not given up yet. Tears welled up again, spilling down her cheeks before she even spoke. Miss Jean, Eleanor, please don't be angry. It was my fault. I sincerely apologize. Please, don't punish Charles for my mistake. I know you might have misconceptions about my relationship with Charles. But things aren't always as they seem. But now that this incident has occurred, perhaps we shouldn't act impulsively. Let's sit down, discuss this rationally, and find a way to navigate this difficult situation together. For the sake of everyone involved, wouldn't that be best? Charles's demeanor instantly softened. He squeezed Isabelle's hand, his voice dripping with syrupy affection. Isabelle, you're always so reasonable, so understanding. I confess, for a fleeting moment, I felt a surge of nausea. Isabelle, I said, interrupting their nauseating display of faux affection, you seem to have a rather skewed understanding of the word difficult situation. With that, I swiftly typed out a message on my phone. Moments later, a knock sounded on the door, and a man in a sharp business suit entered. Madam Jean, he greeted me, bowing slightly. Here are the documents you requested. I gestured towards Charles. The suited man placed a thick folder directly in front of him. Mr. Thornton, the man addressed Charles formally, this folder contains a detailed breakdown of the financial losses incurred by the Thornton Corporation due to your recent indiscretions following the announcement of the Jean-Thornton alliance. This includes the decline in share price and the evaporation of market capitalization. Please review the figures. If they meet with your approval, kindly remit the indicated sum within the stipulated timeframe. Charles flipped open the folder, his face draining of color as he scanned the contents. 20 million, he exclaimed, his voice incredulous. This is highway robbery. Even outright fraud is less audacious than this. I waved a dismissive hand, adopting a tone of mock humility. Fraud involves legal repercussions, Charles. Potential jail time, free meals provided by the state. My method, however, is perfectly legal, and far more lucrative. Isabelle's eyes widened, a flicker of something calculating within their depths. Miss Jean, she began, her voice suddenly saccharine, I understand you are fond of Charles. Perhaps resentful that I have captured his affections. But surely, you don't need to resort to such drastic measures to demonstrate your displeasure? Charles has no company shares, no personal income beyond his allowance. Where is he supposed to find such an exorbitant sum? Please, take Charles back. Release him from this financial burden. I'll step aside. Just don't make him suffer like this. Charles, deeply moved by her selfless sacrifice, clutched Isabelle's hand, his voice thick with emotion. Isabelle, my heart belongs to you. No one can ever take that away. No matter what tactics they employ. I recoiled, feigning horror. Please, no. Absolutely not. I've never heard of anyone willingly retrieving discarded refuse. Since you two are clearly not here to offer a sincere apology, I continued, my voice hardening, kindly take your documentation and depart. Your presence is detrimental to the patient's recuperation. Charles, clutching the damning folder, seemed poised to argue further, but Isabelle tugged at his sleeve, finally leading him away. Due to my injury, returning home immediately was impractical. I decided to temporarily relocate to the Thornton residence. En route, I recounted the compensation demands to Alexander. He merely nodded, indicating he was already aware. Whoever creates the mess is responsible for cleaning it up, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. He's an adult. He needs to take responsibility for his actions. I raised an eyebrow, studying his impassive profile. Are you truly not bothered? 20 million is a considerable sum. Charles will undoubtedly return, begging you for funds. Bothered? Alexander repeated, a flicker of something enigmatic, a blend of amusement and disdain, in his eyes. Rest assured that some will not be forthcoming from me. Good, I replied, feeling a sense of satisfaction. Alexander glanced at me, a hint of concern softening his features. I have an urgent board meeting shortly. Once we arrive, please rest. Wang Auntie will assist with your medication and ointment application. Understood. Alexander, pressed for time, had the driver drop him at his company headquarters before proceeding to the Thornton estate with me. Before departing, I'd contacted Agnes, requesting her to pack and send over my essential belongings. Upon arrival at the Thornton residence, Wang Auntie was waiting, guarding my luggage. Mr. Thornton's bedroom is on the 3rd floor, she informed me. Generally, it's off-limits to outsiders. Regarding your belongings, have them moved to the 3rd floor, I declared, reclining on a sofa as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Surely, newly married couples don't sleep in separate wings. Wang Auntie chuckled, clearly delighted, and efficiently directed the staff to transport my belongings upstairs. Mr. Thornton's wardrobe is rather extensive, she commented, and quite empty. With your things moved in, the room will feel much more lived in. Wang Auntie was clearly a seasoned expert in these matters. Once my things were relocated, she inquired if I had a preferred organizing consultant. I gave her free rein, and she contacted my usual organizer, scheduling an appointment for the following afternoon to unpack and arrange my belongings. I idly scrolled through my phone. It was just past 10 p.m. The entertainment news section remained quiet. The media bombshell I had orchestrated was timed for midnight release. Once Alexander's bedroom was prepared, I was carefully assisted upstairs. Wang Auntie helped me remove my makeup, complete my skincare routine, and apply the prescribed ointment before leaving me to rest. The king-sized, solid-wood bed was truly luxurious. The handcrafted mattress was exquisitely comfortable, even when lying prone. In the quiet of the night, I lay in bed, contemplating the original novel's plot. Charles was slated to inherit the Thornton Corporation at the age of 25. Around that time, Alexander was supposed to be involved in a serious car accident, subsequently retreating to a secluded sanatorium for long-term recuperation. Isabelle, meanwhile, armed with a substantial infusion of resources, would launch her meteoric rise in the entertainment industry. Within a mere 4 years, she would achieve superstardom, only to abruptly retire at the peak of her career to marry Charles and start a family. And me? In the original narrative, I was destined to relentlessly support Charles's ascent to power, even leveraging my own family's resources to pave his way to corporate dominance. Yet, upon consolidating his control over the Thornton Group, his first act would be to orchestrate my family's financial ruin. My father, Clarence, would be unjustly imprisoned. My mother, unable to withstand the shock, would collapse and be hospitalized. I, in turn, would be subjected to a relentless online onslaught from Isabelle's rabid fanbase, ultimately succumbing to the pressure and taking my own life. According to the original plot trajectory, Isabelle's foray into the entertainment industry was not slated to begin until next year. However, I, being of a benevolent and proactive nature, couldn't bear to witness such talent lying dormant. Thus, I decided to lend her a helping hand, accelerating her entry into the public eye. Precisely at midnight, across all social media platforms, a scandalous exposé exploded onto the digital landscape, dominating headlines with unapologetic audacity. I had strategically leaked the story to several prominent news outlets, detailing Charles's flagrant disregard for his impending arranged marriage. His clandestine 3-day hotel tryst with a long-lost female classmate, and his brazenly parading her at a Thornton family gathering. Selected photographs of Isabelle and me in the Thornton estate gardens, captured from deliberately unflattering angles, were prominently featured. Accompanied by sensationalized, almost verbatim accounts of our confrontation, as if the reporters had been eavesdropping from behind the rose bushes. As always, tales of wealthy families and scandalous affairs proved irresistibly captivating. The comment sections of the news articles quickly became a teeming hive of online speculation and commentary. TSK, another social climber, desperate to snag a rich husband. I saw the news about her and Thornton Jr. at the hotel a few days ago. I thought it was a classic loveless arranged marriage groom finds true love scenario. Turns out, the backstory is even juicier than that. Isabelle Sterling became an overnight sensation. By the end of the night, an estimated 2/3 of the internet-using population were engaged in fervent discussions about her. Hashtag Isabelle Sterling homewrecker, hashtag Charles Thornton cheater, hashtag Eleanor Cheen cuckold were trending topics, dominating social media feeds. Precisely 10 minutes after the news broke, Charles's furious phone call shattered the pre-dawn quiet. His voice, even through the phone speaker, was a bellowing roar. I held the device at arm's length, yet his rage still reverberated. Eleanor Cheen. Was that article you? What in damnation are you trying to achieve? Don't you dare forget that our family's alliance is still very much in place. Are you completely oblivious to the damage this will inflict on your family's stock prices? Charles, I drawled, feigning a yawn, considering your own little hotel rendezvous and your audacious family dinner debut with her, did the concept of family alliance even cross your mind at the time? The media is merely reporting factual events, Charles. Hardly my fault if the truth is unflattering. Why the sudden panic? Everything reported is, after all, demonstrably true. Now, suddenly you remember the alliance and attempt to threaten me with it? Do you truly believe that tactic will be effective? The sheer hypocrisy is truly breathtaking, I added, with a delicate sigh. I stifled a yawn, elaborately staged for maximum dramatic effect. Next time you grace me with a phone call, I expect it to be for the express purpose of remitting the owed funds and requesting my bank account details. Anything short of that will be considered harassment. With a decisive flick of my wrist, I terminated the call, simultaneously powering down my phone. Imagining the incandescent rage currently consuming Charles and Isabelle brought a genuine smile to my face. I carefully rolled over. In the expansive king-sized bed, the plush mattress cradling my injured back, and drifted into a comfortable, deeply satisfying sleep. Old men, I mused, just before succumbing to slumber, may be many things, but they certainly know how to live in comfort. Everything in this bedroom was bespoke, the bed frame, the luxurious linens, the cloud-like mattress. Even the seemingly mundane items were exquisitely crafted, representing a level of comfort and quality far beyond mass-produced goods. The next morning, I descended to breakfast rather late. Alexander was already seated at the dining table, halfway through his meal. I was mildly surprised. You're not at work today? Matters are largely concluded, Alexander replied, gesturing with his fork. A period of respite is appropriate. He tapped his fingers lightly on the table, then added, almost grudgingly, a back injury necessitates rest. Avoid excessive activity. Understood, I replied. I'll return home after breakfast. Wang Auntie, clearly enjoying our burgeoning domestic dynamic, chimed in, Madam, should you require anything further, please do not hesitate to call. I will have it sent to you immediately. The breakfast atmosphere was pleasant, if a little subdued. It was, however, abruptly shattered. Charles stormed into the dining room, stopped short by the household staff stationed at the entrance, his voice a rising crescendo of indignation. What in blazes is the meaning of this? Attempting to bar my entry into my own home? Who do you think you are? You are in my family's employ. How dare you obstruct me? Have you all lost your minds? Leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, I observed Charles's escalating tantrum with quiet amusement. My mood was positively buoyant. The legal notice issued by my attorneys, I interjected, my voice calm and measured, cutting through his tirade, I presume you received it? Regarding the outstanding compensation. Prompt remittance is advisable. Otherwise, the next communication will be a formal summons to court. Charles was visibly disheveled, his appearance suggesting a sleepless night. The initial veneer of privileged arrogance he had displayed during our first encounter had noticeably eroded, replaced by a haggard desperation. Eleanor Cheen, he spat, his voice laced with venom, merely because I chose not to marry you, you resort to this? Isabelle was right. You're simply trying to garner my attention. But you can abandon all hope. I would never choose you. My stomach lurched, threatening to revolt against the perfectly poached eggs I had just consumed. I barely managed to suppress the urge to vomit. That utter waste of space, was hardly worth the expulsion of perfectly good food. Charles, Alexander's voice, low and resonant, suddenly materialized behind me. Personal responsibility for one's actions is a fundamental principle of adulthood. I have reiterated this point to you on numerous occasions. You have consistently chosen to disregard my counsel. Further appeals to me will be unproductive. Alexander had materialized silently, like a phantom, positioned directly behind me. "Father," Charles began, his voice rising in protest, but his face crumpled, his bluster deflating. He finally mumbled, I require funds. Approximately 20 million. Alexander's response was curt and dismissive. Financial matters are now under Eleanor's purview. Future requests for living expenses should be directed to your mother. Wang Auntie, having just completed the bed linen change upstairs, succumbed to the temptation of a quick nap, retreating to her quarters. I savored Charles's expression of utter devastation, a look of profound despair that was, frankly, rather gratifying. The morning air suddenly seemed fresher, the sunlight brighter. Charles, denied his monetary lifeline, cast one final, venomous glare in my direction before departing. I merely arched an eyebrow, dismissing it as the impotent rage of a petulant child, and thought nothing further of it. After several days of convalescence at the Thornton estate, the date of the originally scheduled wedding approached. My mother suggested a casual dinner gathering for our families to meet. She was, undeniably, quite taken with Alexander. In her estimation, while Alexander was somewhat older, his maturity, stability, and undeniable handsomeness, particularly when juxtaposed with Charles's petulance, made him an exceptionally desirable husband. In fact, she declared, Alexander Thornton was the kind of man one would search for with a lantern in broad daylight, and still be hard-pressed to find. Upon hearing of the proposed family dinner, Alexander's lips tightened slightly, a hint of unease flickering across his usually composed features. A pre-dinner outing, he suggested, his voice carefully neutral. Perhaps you would accompany me to select gifts for your parents? A customary gesture for a first meeting? I hummed noncommittally. Very well. I suppose I can spare you a few hours. At the department store, I was browsing with growing enthusiasm when a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. Familiar figures. Alexander, laden with shopping bags, hurried to catch up, relieved to see I had ceased my relentless browsing. Have you completed your selections? He inquired, a hint of weary relief in his voice. Not entirely, I replied, my gaze fixed on something in the distance. But I've spotted acquaintances. His momentary cheerfulness vanished, replaced by a familiar grimness. I elaborated, your son and your future daughter-in-law. Alexander's expression darkened further, a flash of undisguised distaste crossing his features. He hefted the shopping bags. Allow me to deposit these in the vehicle. As Alexander headed towards the parking garage, I noticed Charles and Isabelle following in his wake, acting with a peculiar air of furtiveness. Their behavior struck me as odd. Alexander returned shortly, his demeanor perfectly normal. I dismissed the fleeting unease, assuming Charles and Isabelle were merely attempting to wheedle more money from Alexander. The minor incident faded from my thoughts. As the scheduled family dinner approached, the following evening, I decided to return to my family home. Dinner was meticulously prepared. My father, Clarence, even made a rare early return from his office. Yet, half an hour past the designated time, Alexander remained conspicuously absent. This was entirely out of character for Alexander. I attempted to call him. No answer. I called the Thornton residence. Wang Auntie informed me that Mr. Thornton had departed earlier in the evening. Calls to his company also proved fruitless. Alexander Thornton had seemingly vanished into thin air. His sudden, inexplicable disappearance triggered an instinctive unease. A chilling premonition whispered that Charles and Isabelle were somehow involved. Driven by an inexplicable urgency, I initiated a discreet search for Alexander's whereabouts, while simultaneously urging my father to return to his company and monitor the impending Thornton Corporation business deal. That particular deal had been the recipient of considerable Chin family investment, both financially and strategically. If those two imbeciles jeopardized it, I swore I would personally string them up by their ankles and use them as garden gnomes. Moments later, an anonymous private message pinged on my phone, containing a location, a rather obscure private hospital, accompanied by a terse, chilling message. Car accident. Comatose. I massaged my temples, the unease solidifying into cold dread. My worst fears, confirmed. I hastily gathered my security detail, racing to the designated hospital. A phalanx of men blocked the main entrance, preventing entry. I gave a cold, humorless laugh. Call the police. I'm curious to see what kind of hospital operates with such blatant disregard for public access, in broad daylight. A flustered man in a white coat hurried out, beads of perspiration dotting his forehead. Miss Jean, I apologize profusely. The hospital is currently under restricted access. I must request that you seek medical attention elsewhere. I produced my marriage certificate, flashing it in his face. I noted the nameplate on his lab coat. Dr. Cheen, I addressed him icily. Alexander Thornton, my husband, was involved in a car accident and is hospitalized here. If surgery is required, wouldn't family authorization be necessary? Since I wasn't notified, who authorized the procedure? Dr. Cheen's face twitched. Well, in emergency situations, protocols are expedited. If primary family contact is unavailable, other relevant parties may authorize procedures. Furthermore, he added, with a nervous cough, your marriage to Mr. Thornton was discreet. Many are still unaware of Mr. Thornton's marital status. So, I pressed, my voice dangerously low, you're admitting that Alexander Thornton, while comatose, underwent surgery at this facility, without proper familial consent? Dr. Cheen's face paled. You're twisting my words. I waved a dismissive hand, no longer interested in verbal sparring. I gestured to my security detail. Restrain Dr. Cheen. Secure him, somewhere prominent. I pointed to a sturdy oak tree in the hospital courtyard. And then, proceed inside. Call emergency services and the police, I instructed, as we moved towards the entrance. This hospital is demonstrably obstructing emergency medical care and conducting unauthorized surgical procedures without familial consent. Grossly negligent. Contact the Cheen family legal team. Prepare for litigation. And notify the Thornton family, particularly those with company shares. Dr. Cheen's composure completely crumbled. Miss Cheen, please. Let's discuss this rationally. Mr. Thornton is here, in a coma, following a car accident. But his family has already signed the surgical consent forms. Guided by a frantic nurse, I was quickly led to the emergency operating room entrance. There, as expected, stood Charles and Isabelle, flanked by a lawyer, engaged in hushed, conspiratorial whispers. Charles, upon seeing me, his expression a toxic blend of hatred and resentment, snarled, Eleanor Cheen, you're like a persistent pest. Even a bloodhound is less tenacious than you. I offered a tight, humorless smile. Perhaps not quite as tenacious as you two. You managed to track your bone 4 miles, even without it being dangled in front of your noses. The operating room light was illuminated, indicating surgery in progress. A nurse confirmed that Dr. Cheen was indeed the primary surgeon, and the surgical team was already prepped and inside. Dr. Cheen, currently dangling precariously from a tree branch, was supposedly in charge of Alexander's surgery? I gestured to my security detail. Open the door. The heavy door swung inward. Alexander lay on the operating table, still unconscious. Blood matted his hair, his forehead still visibly bleeding, clotting only due to his own body's coagulation mechanisms. Words were unnecessary. Charles and Isabelle were apprehended by my security detail, effectively restrained until the police arrived. I swiftly organized Alexander's transfer to a reputable medical facility. Upon arrival at the new hospital, Alexander was immediately rushed into emergency care. The Thornton family arrived shortly thereafter. Alexander's grandmother, upon hearing the full account of events, her lips trembling, grasped my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Eleanor, child, thank heavens you were there. You saved Alexander's life. I merely nodded, unable to dislodge my hand from her fervent grasp. Alexander's aunt's husband erupted in fury. Charles Thornton is utterly unconscionable. To stoop to such depths for corporate control. He must be punished severely. Alexander's uncle, while equally enraged, managed to maintain a semblance of composure. Let the authorities handle him for now. We'll address the matter further once Alexander regains consciousness. Alexander held a 45% controlling share in the Thornton Corporation. His extended family held scattered, minority shares. If Alexander remained incapacitated, and Charles's fabricated documentation proved valid, Alexander's shares would be inaccessible to his family. And knowing Charles's avaricious nature, their own shares would likely be at risk. Alexander's aunt frowned, her brow furrowed in concern. Alexander, dear boy, why would he undertake such a significant action without consulting the family? To keep such a momentous decision concealed from us. Alexander's uncle glanced at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. I excused myself, citing urgent matters, and withdrew from the increasingly fraught family gathering. Charles's audacious actions were, undeniably, beyond my expectations. The revelation of a previously unknown familial connection between Charles and Alexander was equally startling. Public perception was that Charles was Alexander's adopted son, a mere 8-year age gap fueling years of speculation. I had never considered a blood relation. They were, in fact, half-brothers. Charles, the illegitimate offspring. Alexander's parents, I had gleaned, were portrayed as deeply devoted, their marriage a paragon of marital bliss. This new information cast a rather different light on their supposed idyllic union. Alexander's parents had tragically perished in an accident several years prior. Shortly after their deaths, Alexander had adopted Charles as his stepson. At the time, Alexander's actions were met with raised eyebrows and hushed whispers within social circles. Had the loss of his parents unhinged him? Was he emotionally unstable? In retrospect, Alexander's actions now seemed far more calculated, far more strategic. Not a sign of grief-induced instability, but a deliberate maneuver to keep Charles firmly under his thumb, perpetually confined to a position of subservience. 2 days later, with Alexander's condition stabilized, I shifted my focus entirely to the legal and public dismantling of Charles and Isabelle. The evidence against Charles was overwhelming, irrefutable. Even a desperate attempt at a legal counter-offensive would be futile. Yet, Charles remained unnervingly composed. Even in police custody, he displayed no remorse, no fear, only a chillingly cold defiance. Upon seeing me, he merely sneered. Eleanor Cheen, don't delude yourself into thinking you've won. So, I made a mistake. So what? Thornton blood flows through my veins. Thornton wealth is my birthright. A few years in prison? Insignificant. When I emerge, the tables will turn. We shall see who truly emerges victorious. Rest assured, Charles, Alexander's voice, cool and steel-edged, cut through the air. He had materialized silently beside me, having overheard Charles's pathetic bravado. You will not be emerging. Attempted murder, corporate espionage, theft of confidential company information. Alexander enumerated the charges, his voice devoid of emotion. These charges, combined, should guarantee your extended retirement within the penal system. I clasped my hands together, a picture of saccharine delight. Such excellent benefits. Lifetime accommodation, meals provided, truly, you are fortunate beyond measure. A blessing in disguise, wouldn't you agree? Charles's carefully constructed facade finally shattered. He pounded on the reinforced glass, his face contorted with rage, his voice a desperate scream. I will hire lawyers. I will appeal. I will not accept this injustice. His increasingly frantic shouts faded into insignificance, ignored by all present. Alexander and I walked away from the holding cell, the echoes of Charles's impotent fury receding behind us. Alexander turned to me. Would you care to visit Miss Sterling? She is in the adjacent holding cell. I shook my head, dismissive. Why bother? I have better things to do with my time. Like, resting my injured back. Silence descended between us as we walked. After a few minutes of companionable quiet, Alexander spoke, a hint of awkwardness in his voice. Regarding the family dinner with your parents. Circumstances intervened. Is it still appropriate to proceed? Or would it be intrusive? I hesitated, then voiced my father's earlier, albeit quickly retracted, pronouncements. My father, he was rather upset. He suggested. Once the current business deal between our families is finalized, we should discreetly dissolve our marriage. Forgo the wedding ceremony altogether. Clarence, indeed, had made such pronouncements, only to be promptly banished from the house by my mother. Alexander's response was immediate, almost vehement. Absolutely not. I raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in my eyes. Why absolutely not? Our marriage was, after all, rather clandestine. Few are even aware of our nuptials. That was my oversight, Alexander conceded, a hint of self-reproach in his voice. I will rectify that immediately. Public announcement will be arranged. He paused, then added, a note of almost plaintive appeal entering his voice. Eleanor, when will I be granted the privilege of dining with your parents? Alexander's forehead was still bandaged, the recent trauma having visibly thinned his frame, accentuating his already sharp features. The blood loss had left him pale, almost fragile. Paired with his naturally aristocratic features, he possessed an unexpected, almost poignant vulnerability. An unfamiliar warmth crept up my neck, flushing my ears. I averted my gaze, my voice a low murmur. Perhaps, when you've fully recovered. Alexander's demeanor shifted, becoming unexpectedly firm, almost possessive. As my wife commands. The end.